All right, great. Well, thanks for this opportunity to provide an update on our WID data sharing system. Just to kind of go back a little bit to let everybody know where this started. Back in 2009, Colorado Parks and Wildlife would annually hire literally an army of temporary employees to enter the 450,000 inspections we had per year on paper into a database. That wasn't a very effective way to handle data collection, so we had an awesome inspector out there who said there's got to be a better way to do it. It's 2009 and we have all this great mobile technology. So we adopted that inspector into our program. He developed the initial version of this application on the Windows mobile operating system. What the heck is that? That's the operating system you see on those really clunky Motorola scanners they use for inventory at Home Depot and Walmart, which is exactly what we were doing at the time. Those things are pretty clunky and they also cost a lot, about $1,200 per device, so we didn't get very far with that. We figured there was a better way to do it, so in 2012 we worked with the contractor Astonish to revamp this application on the iOS and Android operating systems, which everyone is much more familiar with. It's much more cost effective and a better way to do business. So we had some pretty great success with that. We deployed this statewide in Colorado in 2013 and then started adding other western states to the application in 2014. This application was funded by U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service QZAP grant from 2016 to 2018. That grant primarily provided funding for hosting, maintenance, help desk, and enhancements. The application is owned and administered by Colorado Parks and Wildlife, and again, it's contracted with Astonish, who manages the help desk and does all those awesome things to actually keep this thing running. The 2019 season was funded by a BOR grant out of the Lower Colorado region. So there's two primary components to this application. There is a mobile component, which is essentially a data collection utility for use out there in the field. This allows the inspectors to enter data, to query previous inspections so they can figure out where these boats have been inspected. Allows us to provide notifications to different recipient states of boats leaving infested waters. And then there is a website component, which is much more of an administrative feature. This has things like data viewing, editing, querying, reporting, allowing us to manipulate the forms that are being used by the users out there in the field. There is also 24/7 help desk support. As you see there on the slide, that's not my desk. That's those guys' desk over at Astonish. They offer help desk support 24/7, 365. They have their own number there, 888-390-7275. They will gladly answer that number day or night. It's hard keeping up the help desk there, Dennis. All right, so just kind of a little bit of a history of adoption of this program. Again, in 2012, Colorado kind of developed the initial version of this on that iOS and Android operating system sitting out there on an island. That's when I started with the program. We kind of rode this thing out for about 3 years until the pioneers in data sharing out there, the states of New Mexico and Utah, joined on board. At that time, this was not a customizable application. They were stuck with using the form that we were using in Colorado. Thanks, guys, for taking that on. That was only the beginning. We like free stuff. 2016, there was a really significant change to the application, and what that was is that we offered customizations through what we call an authorized agency. An authorized agency is just a user group within the application, and once you are set up as an authorized agency, you can set up your own preferences, which just means you can change the form that you're using for inspectors out there to record information in the field. By allowing people to customize the application, this became much more widely usable across the West, and we started seeing some pretty quick adoption. So you see there in 2016, we added the states of Nevada and Arizona. By 2018, we had 12 different agencies and entities using the application across the West. And then in 2019, we added 3 more groups to the application, including Nebraska, Oregon, and the folks out at the Big Bear Municipal Water District. As you can see there on the map, the vast majority of the western states are now employing this as their primary form of data collection. So when we really look to growing this thing in the future, we're now looking to the east, which is kind of a different train of thought from where we've been previously. All right, so just some kind of information as to what we looked at over the last few years. We continue to see more and more locations reporting information through this system on an annual basis. For the 2019 season, we had 298 locations across the West reporting inspection information through this system. We also continue to see a growth in the amount of inspections that are being recorded out there. As Jason so eloquently put it yesterday, we broke over 1 million inspections already by the end of September in 2019, which is just awesome to see that much information being gathered. The only thing that's not growing in 2019 is the amount of decontaminations that are being recorded through the system. I'm not going to try to draw any conclusions there, but it is a pretty interesting piece of information to see that number decreasing as our inspections increase. All right, so back in the day, this was just kind of a, data, and people started to want to see these things visualized. So last year, we started putting together a mapping application to associate with this data that's being collected at our inspection stations all across the West. This was primarily designed as a risk assessment tool to let us know where boats are being inspected, how they're moving across these inspection stations. So we kind of started that off by just mapping out shared boats. Essentially all that is looking at where boats are being inspected, and then if that same boat is being inspected at another location. This becomes really beneficial to us when we can see a place like Lake Powell and how widespread those boats leaving Lake Powell really are. That does illustrate a pretty significant risk of the boats coming out of these locations. I thought it was pretty awesome to take a look at how many boats are actually being inspected at multiple locations, just kind of telling us about usage out there. For 2019, we had about 270,000 unique registrations that were logged as inspected through the system. Out of the 1 million inspections, that's about 25% of our boaters are using multiple or being inspected at multiple stations. Of those 270,000 unique registrations, about 52,000 of them were shown as being inspected in more than one place, so about 20% of those boaters. And we had our most transient boater award goes to a Utah boater who actually got inspected at 21 locations during the 2019 season. Must be nice. All right, looking at that same kind of information for our zebra and quagga mussel positive waters, they had about 50,000 unique boats logged at those locations, and about 30% of those are being logged at other locations across the West. So those visiting those positive and suspect waters do seem to be a little more transient than the average boater. All right, another one that we've kind of put together here in the last month or so is looking at the origin zip code for some of boaters. So as Samantha mentioned yesterday, there is a little bit of a limitation in this, and that we are looking at information that's being provided by the boater. So, you never know how true that really is. But it's pretty cool to be able to look at a place up here in Montana and see that they are literally seeing boats from all across the country at these locations. I apologize to our Canadian friends. I am working on those postal codes. We'll try to get that worked in there in the very near future. So Colorado doesn't record zip codes when we're doing inspections, so I don't know what the rest of you are going to do with this, but hopefully you find it useful for risk assessment, station planning, demographics, like Samantha went across yesterday, trying to find all of those soccer moms that are out there boating at your waters. All right, so something we've talked about quite a bit in the past, but not really gotten too much into it, was our governance committee. The governance committee has been quite a bit more active during the 2019 season. We have some pretty strong tasks ahead of us. We have had a couple of meetings. One of those was determining our top development priorities. So with over 15 groups using this application, there is a lot of different ideas for how to make it better. The governance committee is going through those different enhancement ideas and prioritizing them. Unfortunately, there's not unlimited funding to do everything that everybody wants, so it's great to have some people looking at these and trying to identify the best way to move forward. As we get more and more information and more boat inspections going on out there, there are also a lot of new technologies that are being proposed, things like automating boat inspections, or at least putting those into the system. So as those new technologies are put out there, we are trying to work through our governance committee to take presentations and evaluate those new technologies and see which ones would provide the greatest benefit. We are also currently working on developing criteria for how we're going to evaluate those new technologies. And of course, with more data comes more requests for that data. Every person who puts information into this system is the owner of that data, so it's certainly not my right to just distribute information to whoever asks for it. So we are currently working on developing a data request template, criteria for evaluating those data requests, and then we'll also be looking to hopefully approve the majority of those as long as they are not of ill intent. So look forward to that in the near future. So we got a lot of good new features out of the 2019 season. We are working again through those governance priorities. We got priority number 1 knocked out here in the last couple of weeks, which was enhancing our data export process. We got a good request out of Whiskey back at the January meeting that they wanted to receive notifications if boats from their locations were being decontaminated at other places, so we got that done. You can see some of those other ideas as we move down the list. I do want to point out that we have had a couple of our user groups fund some pretty awesome changes here this past year as well. So the state of Utah came up with a great idea to provide a notification if a boat was last inspected at a positive water. Basically how that works is if you put a vessel registration in, a query runs in the background, and if the last time that boat was inspected was at, let's say, Lake Powell, a big red notification pops up to the inspector that says, hey, this boat was last at Lake Powell. That body of water is positive for quagga mussels. So that's been very well received by our inspection staff. And the Tahoe Regional Planning Agency continues to invest in this application. They've done some great things like enhancing our search mechanisms throughout the application that benefits everyone, and further customize their own personalized workflow, which has also been great for those folks out there. All right, 2020, things are looking good for 2020. It's good to see that we have continued support for this application. We have ongoing application hosting, development, and support by the BOR's Lower Colorado region, as well as U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service for the 2020 season. We do also have, beyond that, basic funding available to complete those primary governance committee priorities that were identified at the beginning of last season. Some other great things that I'm looking forward to is, again, having some of our user groups fund enhancements to the application that they think will be greatly beneficial to their users. As Nate mentioned yesterday, Lake Powell is spending many hours doing data entry, and we want to try to expedite that as much as possible. Of course, the end goal is kind of doing some of that automated, but until then, we are working on an expedited exit inspection flow to really speed up that entry process for them. And the great folks here in Montana have a long list of enhancements that they are looking forward to getting done that I think will have great impacts on all of our users. And of course, as these enhancements are developed, they become available to every user of the application. So collaboratively, we are all making this thing a lot better. All right, so as I've stated, we got 15 user groups out there. They all have their own ideas as to how we could make this application better than it is today. We do have a change request process in place out there. Essentially, there's a form that all of our users are free to submit all of their great ideas on how to improve this application, and it will be the governance committee's duty to really prioritize those and tell us what they think is the best for all of the users out there. If they don't get approved by the governance committee, then there are these options for the particular agency who is requesting that to fund their own enhancements, as we've seen over the last few years. So a lot of ways to get those things done. All right, that's my update, everything that's kind of happened with the application here in the last year or so. It didn't seem like a lot until I put it all down on paper, and it has been a pretty awesome year. So appreciate the opportunity.
I got a question. Robert, we've talked about adding, we've talked about adding decontamination locations, or some type of app. Where are we on that?
Adding decontamination.
Well, no, adding places, if a member of the public wants to get their boat decontaminated, and they're in Arizona, and they're going to Montana, they're like, okay, it's like finding a Starbucks. Where can I go to get my boat decontaminated? Remember that discussion?
Yes, I do remember that discussion. I would say that at this point, that is something separate. This application is really for use by the inspectors and decontaminators out there in the field, and I don't think we intend to give access to the public.
Right, so but what I'm doing is just reminding us all that that is still a priority.
Absolutely, yep. We're talking about that very regularly. Go ahead, Nate. Or Tammy.
Maybe part of that conversation could be post dumping West 911 communication. Martina and I were talking about the value of that. I know other Western entities aren't using it anymore, which is why it's been proposed to axe it, but I guess we could add communications to the need.
And just to follow up on Stephen's question, that is one component of the app that we are proposing to build, whether it's in Utah or whether it's with regional funding. That app would be available to any state to adopt and to modify as they see fit, just like Colorado did with the database.
Did you look at the cost of the app?
We have. I've received quotes anywhere from 100 to 200,000 for an all-encompassing app, with that being one component.
So the outreach committee did look into your request, Stephen, regarding could we go to like Google Maps and put in decontamination station, and Elizabeth spent a lot of time looking at that with Ed, and there were some caveats on how to do that. And so they are now working with Google to try to do that simply in addition to what Nate's looking at. We would be actually looking at Google Maps. So we are looking at that.
Thank you for the presentation. Is there any, for those agencies or individuals that do have access to the data or successfully submit a data request, is there any kind of API function so that they can more or better integrate the data here into what other type of data visualizations they're using locally, whether it's pairing it with water, physio, chemistry data that they have on their own networks?
At this point, the data export utility is dumping directly into a flat CSV file, but that is something that we're looking at because we want to be able to do some of the mapping things that I've been showing in a more live fashion than is currently possible, so it's certainly on the table.
Robert, if you could just provide your home phone number so I can pass that on to my techs, that would be appreciated.
I appreciate that, Nate.
Anytime.
I just wanted to maybe quickly build from Tammy's comment with the potential getting rid of West 911, just generally in terms of watercraft notifications going to jurisdictions that aren't using the app, BC being an example. What's the best way to make sure that that still happens in a coordinated and efficient way? So I think it's just linking to that sort of notification process, and what does that look like for jurisdictions that aren't using the app? And is it any cheaper now to get it in Canada?
All right, couple questions there. So if you are not actively using the application to enter inspection and decontamination information, you are still more than eligible to be a recipient of those movement notice forms, and I would have thought that you already were. So if you're not receiving those, please let me know and I will make sure that that's resolved immediately. And in terms of the cost, don't ask me, ask those guys. But I wouldn't guess it's getting cheaper. Okay, Jolene?
Thanks, Robert. Who is on the governance committee? Is that just the CPW folks or?
Oh, no, definitely not just CPW folks. Most of the states who are using the application do have representation on the governance committee, so it's pretty well represented. The only CPW folks are myself and Elizabeth. Okay, thanks again. Thanks, Robert. Yep.